And this week's Parsha is Parshas Vayeira. It begins in page 79, and that is chapter 18, verse 1. In Bereshit, it begins, Hashem appeared to him in the plains of Mamre while he was sitting at the entrance of the tent in the heat of the day. And the commentaries say that it says Hashem appeared to him. So we're kind of in the middle. We have to be in the middle of a story because we use a pronoun without ever saying who we're talking about. So the Rabbi Bachya says that it's clear from this that we're jumping off the last week's parsha, which discussed how Avraham gave a bris milah, circumcised everyone in his family and himself, and this is a continuation of that. And Hashem appeared to him, to that Avraham who had just circumcised himself. Hashem appeared to him in the plains of Mamre once again while he was sitting at the entrance of the tent in the heat of the day. And why was it that Hashem appeared to him? So the Ramban says that the simple answer is that he just performed a great mitzvah, that he had just circumcised himself and his entire family, and himself especially at the ripe old age of 99. So, so he had just circumcised himself, and because in the merit of that mitzvah, Hashem appeared to him to give him honor for having done the mitzvah. And our sages say also is that Hashem was fulfilling the mitzvah of visiting the sick. That Avraham was sick, he was in pain from the circumcision, so Hashem visited him as we have a mitzvah to visit the sick. But it says that he was sitting at the entrance of the tent in the heat of the day. Why was he there? And our sages say that Avraham, his greatest attribute was chesed, kindness, loving kindness, and he, especially when it came to having guests and being hospitable to others. So even though he was in great pain and recovering from his circumcision, but he was out there sitting at the entrance of his tent in the heat of the day to see if there were any passerbys that he could provide hospitality for. And in fact, it continues in verse 2, he lifted his eyes and saw, and behold, 3 men were standing over him. He perceived, so he ran towards them from the entrance of the tent and bowed towards the ground. And he said, my Lord, if I find favor in your eyes, please pass not away from your servant. Don't leave, come join me. So in verse 2, it first says, and he saw, and 3 men were standing over them, and then it says, and he perceived. The English is actually the identical word as and he saw. It says and he saw twice. He saw and and then he saw again and ran to greet them. So the Ramban understands, and this is Rabbi Bachya brings this, is that at first he saw that there were men. He lifted his eyes and saw 3 men were standing over him. 3 men were nearby. And then he saw, meaning he perceived, he recognized that they were angels. So at first he saw them as men, and then he looked closer and he recognized that they were angels that had the appearance of men, and Avraham, being spiritually sensitive, was able to perceive this. So he ran towards them from the entrance of the tent and bowed towards the ground, which he did because they were angels. And he said, my Lord, if I find favor in your eyes, please pass not away from your servant. Let some water be brought and wash your feet, and recline beneath the tree. I'll fetch a morsel of bread that you may sustain yourself, and then go on, and as much of you have passed your servant's way. And they said, do so just as you had said. So he offered, wash yourself up, and I'll get you a little bit of bread. And in verse 6, so Avram hastened to the tent to Sarah and said, hurry, 3 seah of meal, fine flour, knead and make cakes. And then Avram ran to the cattle, took a calf tender and good, and gave it to the youth who hurried to prepare it. He took cream and milk, and the calf which he had prepared, and placed these before the men. He stood over them beneath the tree, and they ate. So our sages point out that what did Avram tell them he would do? He's told them, you could sit here under the tree, wash yourself up, and I'll get you a little bit of a morsel of bread. He offered them a little bit of bread. And then what did he do? He had Sarah prepare these great knead and make cakes, these like big loaves of bread. And then it said he ran to the cattle, took a calf, tender and good. Our sages understand this actually referring to 3 separate cows that he went and got for them because he wanted each one to have the finest cut of meat, which was the tongue. So he needed 3 cows and prepared them in cream and milk and the calf. So he offered them a little bit of bread and gave them this whole like 4-course meal. And I was saying to say this is an example of the saying in Pirkei Avos that we should say a little and do a lot. That the wicked, they talk a big game, but when it comes down to it, they don't do a lot. Whereas the righteous, they say a little but do a lot. When they're offering, they don't talk the big game. They say that I'll do this little bit, but when it comes down to it, when it comes to the action, they actually do a lot. And that's what Avram did. He offered a little bit, but when he actually gave them the food, he prepared a whole feast. It also says that and Avram ran to the cattle. Why was he running to the cattle? And the Medrash says that he was going to get the cow, and it kept on running away from him. And he pursued it, and it fled until finally he caught up to it in a cave. And that cave was the cave of Machpelah, where eventually he would be buried. And I say to say, why was it that this was where he found the cave of Machpelah? It was because he was he was working hard towards fulfilling the mitzvah of hospitality, of inviting in guests and giving them a place to stay and a place to eat. So in the merit of that, Hashem gave him a place to rest for all eternity. Hashem gave him a place to be buried, a holy place to be buried. Okay. So it continues in verse 9. They said to him, "Where is Sarah, your wife?" And he said, "Behold, in the tent." Then I'm on page 81, verse 10. And he said, "I will surely return to you at this time next year, and behold, Sarah, your wife, will have a son." Now Sarah was listening at the entrance of the tent, which was behind him. Now Sarah and Avram were old, well on in years, and the manner of women had ceased to be with Sarah. He thought she had not been menstruating for a long time. She was an old woman. In verse 12, and Sarah laughed at herself, saying, "After I have withered, shall I again have delicate skin, and my husband is old?" Then Hashem said to Avram, "Why is it that Sarah laughed, saying, 'Shall I in truth bear a child, though I have aged? Is anything beyond Hashem? At the appointed time I will return to you at this time next year, and Sarah will have had a son.' And Sarah denied it, saying, 'I did not laugh, for she was frightened.' But he said, 'No, you laughed indeed.'" Okay. So it says here, just a few points here. First of all, that it says that Sarah laughed and said, "After I withered, shall I again have delicate skin, and my husband is old." So one of her problems with this, one of the reasons that she laughed was because her husband is old. Whereas Hashem said to Avram, "Why is it that Sarah laughed, saying, 'Shall I in truth bear a child, though I have aged?'" Meaning she had aged. So I say that Hashem was bending the truth, that instead of telling Avram that she said that he's old, told Avram that she said that she is old. And we see from here that one is allowed to bend the truth for the sake of peace. And if someone and this is something that's really obvious, is that if we tell the truth all the time, we always say what we're thinking and how we feel, this will destroy our peace, because we know that discretion is sometimes the better part of valor. And if we just let everything out and just be completely blunt about how we feel, it'll disturb people, it'll hurt their feelings, and insult them. And sometimes it's better to keep quiet than say the truth. And in this case, Hashem bent the truth in order to keep the peace between Avram and Sarah. And that's the right thing to do.
Didn't Aaron do the same thing?
Yes, he did. So Aaron did it more actively. And here it was more that it was by omission. Aaron would go to it wasn't necessarily not the truth. He would go to when two parties had a feud, he would go to one party and say, "That guy really feels bad about it and wishes that he could make peace, but he's embarrassed to approach you," which might be the truth. It's just that person hadn't approached Aaron to tell him that. So I don't know if necessarily that was lying for the sake of peace, but it's a similar idea, is that peace is something that's so important that even Hashem would bend the truth for the sake of peace. Okay, another thing that they point out here is that these three angels, it says that Avram saw three men, and we said the Ramban says he recognized they were angels, he perceived that they were angels. But it says that when he was telling him, in verse 10, it says, "And he said, 'I will surely return to you at this time next year, and behold, Sarah, your wife, will have a son.'" Not that they said, but he said. There was only one of these men, one of these angels, that said this. And I say to say that, in fact, these three angels were the angel Michael, the angel Raphael and the angel Gavriel. And Michael is the angel of Hashem's mercy that's sent to carry out Hashem's mercy. Gavriel is the angel that's sent out to carry out Hashem's justice, Hashem's judgment. And Raphael is the angel Hashem sends to heal. And all these three angels had three different missions, and that's angels, they all have their own unique mission. And the angel Michael was sent for two reasons. Michael was sent in order to give this news to Avram and Sarah that they were going to have a child, and he was the speaker here, and in order to rescue Lot from Sodom, which was about to be destroyed. The angel Raphael was sent to heal Avraham, and the angel Gavriel, the angel of Hashem's justice, was sent to destroy the cities of Sodom and Amorah and those around them. So you had these three angels here, and they each had their own unique mission. Okay, so moving on, in verse 16, so the men got up from there, they gazed down towards Sodom while Avram walked with them to escort them. And then in verse 17, and Hashem said, shall I conceal from Avraham what I do, now that Avraham is surely to become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall bless themselves by him. And I think it's the Ramban who says that he was saying, shall I conceal what I'm going to do from Avram, and he's going to be a great and mighty nation? That Hashem's intention was that Avram was going to inherit the land, and meaning this land, Eretz Yisrael, was to be given to Avram, was promised to Avram and to his descendants. So if Hashem was going to destroy a portion of it, he was destroying a portion of Avraham's land. So before doing that, it was appropriate for Hashem to tell Avram, to consult with them, to consult with the owners, even though Hashem is the owner of everything. But since it was given to Avram, Hashem consulted with Avram before he did it. And the Ramban also says that Hashem was telling him this in order that Avram should daven for them, that he was telling him that it's not a done deal, and there's still a shot, you still have a shot to daven. Okay, and it continues in verse 19 on page 83, for I have loved him because he commands his children and his household after him, that they may keep the way of Hashem, doing charity and justice, in order that Hashem might then bring upon Avram that which he has spoken of. So in verse 20 it says, so Hashem said, because the outcry of Sodom and Amorah has become great, and because their sin has been grave, I will descend and see if they act in accordance with its outcry, then destruction, and if not, I will know. This is a very cryptic verse, and what it means, or these two really, what it means, there's a big tumult in the commentaries. What does it mean that Hashem says, I will descend and see if they act in accordance with its outcry, then destruction, if not, I will know? What do you mean? Hashem knows everything. What does it mean Hashem's descending to see? He's going down to get a closer look. What does that mean? So the Beis HaLevi understands that Hashem obviously knows what was done. Hashem knows, but when it says that Hashem's going to descend and see what to do, that means that Hashem's making a decision how to treat them. Should they be treated? Should they be destroyed, or should Hashem allow them to have a tikkun? Should Hashem give them an opportunity to fix the problems? Or are they completely lost, completely gone, and the only option is destruction? The Or HaChaim, though, explains this, is that when it says that Hashem says that he'll go down and see, how does our school translate it? That Hashem will descend and see and know. That means that Hashem descending means Hashem looks at it from the perspective of a human being. Meaning that if Hashem would judge us based on Hashem himself, then we're lost. Meaning Hashem is perfect, and from Hashem's perspective, we would expect perfection. So Hashem judging us, Hashem descending, going down and looking at us means that Hashem looks at us from the perspective of what a human being would see, how these people are acting. And based on that, that's how Hashem judges us. And that's what it means Hashem's descending to see. That Hashem's looking at us from a human perspective, not from a purely spiritual perspective. So in verse 22, the men then turned from there and went to Sodom while Avram was still standing before Hashem. And then Avram prayed for the people of Sodom and Amorah and these 5 cities, and he kept on begging Hashem, if there are 50 righteous men, shouldn't they be saved? Hashem told them they don't have that. If there are 40, shouldn't they be saved? Hashem said they don't have that. Until finally, Hashem told him that he begged for them, but Hashem said that the cities are going to be destroyed. Avram was not able to save them. Okay, so now on page 85, chapter 19, verse 1. It says, the 2 angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting at the gate of Sodom. And now Lot saw and turned to meet them, and he bowed face to the ground, and he said, behold now, my lords, turn about, please, to your servant's house, spend the night, wash your feet, wake up early, and go your way. And they said, no, we'll spend the night in the square. And he urged them very much, and he turned towards them. So they turned towards him and came into his house, and made a feast for them, and baked matzahs, and they ate. So first of all, they baked matzahs, so they say this was Pesach. And also that the fact that Lot invited them into his house on its own was very special, because the city of Sodom, we've spoken about this before, and as it says, the people were very wicked there, which was why Hashem was destroying the city. And we spoke about this last week, that the city of Sodom, they were charity, any act of charity was illegal in the city and was punishable by death. That to bring a guest into one's house carried a death sentence, because they believed what's mine is mine, what's yours is yours, and that's sacred. And if we do kindness for one another, people will be expecting handouts, and we'll be flooded with those who are less affluent than ourselves, and they didn't want that, so they made it illegal and punished anybody who would give charity. Not only did they punish anybody who would give charity, they treated their guests horribly. Anybody who came as a guest would be treated horribly, in order that word would get around, don't go to Sodom, that's bad news. And we'll see what they did to these. But Lot, in spite of the risks himself, invited them into his house, because he had learned at the house of Avram, he had grown up in there and traveled with Avraham, and learned about hospitality, and that became a part of him. But we'll see that his learning was twisted. That he did get that from Avraham, but he twisted Avram's teachings and ran into trouble. So let's continue. So he invited these people into his house and offered them a feast. In verse 4, they had not yet lain down when the townspeople, Sodomites, converged upon the house from young to old, all the people from every quarter. Then they called to Lot and said to him, where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us that we may know them. And we may know them, in biblical sense, meaning that they were looking to sodomize them, which is where the word sodomize comes from the city of Sodom, from this story. And like I said, they wanted to ensure that no guest would ever come to their city. So if word got around that these guests came and they were sodomized by all the townspeople, so people wouldn't be so quick to go there to enjoy their hospitality. And that was their intention. But Reb Shimon Schwab asked, how did this happen? How is it that like these guests come, and all of a sudden all the townspeople are surrounding the house and trying to sodomize the guests? How did that happen? And he says that when Hashem decides that we have to completely destroy them, that means that Hashem's saying that they're lost, they're done, there's no hope. They've hit the bottom of the, they're at the bottom of the pit, and there's no coming back. So Hashem gives them one more shot, one more chance, where they have an incredible temptation, and if they're able to overcome that incredible temptation, then they're saved. They have saved themselves. But it has to be an incredible temptation, and that's what this was. That all the people in the city were overcome by this temptation, and this was if the city was able to rise above this and take control of themselves, so then they would have been saved, and this was their last shot. But they didn't, and because of that, this was their last shot, and they were destroyed. So now they were demanding, so the people of the city, all the people of the city were demanding these angels be sent out, these men, as they saw them, to be sent out so they may know them. So page 87, verse 6, Lot went out to them into the entrance and shut the door behind him. And he said, I beg you, my brothers, do not act wickedly. See now, I have 2 daughters who have never known a man. I shall bring them out to you and do to them as you please. But to these men do nothing, inasmuch as they have come under the shelter of my roof. So here you see how twisted Lot's learning was, that he did learn in the house of Avraham. And he grew up in the house of Avraham, and he learned from the house of Avraham. And it made such an impact on him, the hospitality that Avraham displayed, and he wanted to emulate that. But he wasn't able to internalize it, to understand it and limit it in the proper way. And he took it to such an extent that he was willing to give up his daughters, send their daughters out to the mob for them to satisfy their desires on his daughters in order to save his guests, to do some great hospitality. Meaning that he learned in the house of Avram, but his wickedness that he developed twisted what he learned, and didn't learn how to fulfill it appropriately. And our sages say that because of this, because he was willing to throw his daughters out to the mob, which is something that's beyond our comprehension, that a normal, healthy person, their daughter is someone, the most sensitive subject to a person are their daughters, and that's someone that any man they see as their life's mission is to protect them, and he is willing to throw them out to the mob. And because of this, our sages say later on we see that he had inappropriate encounters with his daughters, and became a laughingstock to the people because of that. But we'll get there. That's in this week's Parsha. Okay, so this is what Lot said to them. And in verse 9, and they said, stand back. And then they said, this fellow came to sojourn and would act as a judge. Now we will treat you worse than them, meaning referring to Lot, that you think you're better than us. You're an immigrant to our city. And he was wealthy, so they accepted him. They said, he's an immigrant to our city, and he's telling us what to do. So now we will treat you worse than them. They pressed exceedingly upon Lot, and they approached to break the door. And in verse 10, the men stretched out their hand and brought Lot into the house with them and closed the door. And the men who had the entrance of the house, they struck with blindness from small to great, and they tried vainly to find the entrance. Then the men said to Lot, whom else do you have here? A son-in-law, your sons or daughters? All that you have in the city, remove from this place, for they're about to destroy this place. And the angels told Lot, we're about to destroy the city. Take all your family and run. Get out of the city and don't even look back, because we're going to destroy it. So Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-law and the betrothed of his daughters, and he said, get up and leave this place, for Hashem is about to destroy the city. But he seemed like a jester in the eyes of his sons-in-law. They laughed at him. They thought he was insane. And just as dawn was breaking, the angels urged Lot on, saying, get up, take your wife, your 2 daughters who are present, lest you be swept away because of the sin of the city. Still he lingered, so the men grasped by him by his hand, his wife's hand, the hands of his 2 daughters, and Hashem's mercy on him. They took him out and left him outside the city. And it was as they took him out that one said, flee for your life. Do not look behind you, nor stop anywhere in this plain. Flee to the mountain, lest you be swept away. And that's what he did. And he fled. And he fled to the mountains and hid in a cave. And the city was Sodom, Amorah, and they were destroyed. And as it says in verse 23, the sun rose up upon the earth, and Lot arrived at Zoar. Now Hashem has called sulfur and fire and rain upon Sodom and Amorah. From Hashem out of the heaven, he overturned these cities and the entire plain with all the inhabitants of the cities and the vegetation of the soil. His wife peered behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. And our sages say that was measure for measure, that it says that she didn't want the guests. So she revealed to the people of the city that he was hosting guests by going out asking to borrow salt. That she said she needed to borrow salt because she was making a big feast. And through that, people understood that they had guests. So she became a pillar of salt. Okay. The Rabbeinu Bachus said that this could also be read that his wife peered behind him, and the city became a pillar of salt. Not that she became a pillar of salt, but that's the medrash, is that she became a pillar of salt. Okay, so now that's what it was. And like we said, in verse 29 that the cities were destroyed. And it was when Hashem destroyed the cities of the plain that Hashem remembered Avram. So he sent Lot from amidst the upheaval when he overturned the cities in which Lot had lived. He was saved in the memory of Avram. And in verse 30 on the bottom of 89, page 89, now Lot went up from Zoar and settled in the mountains, his 2 daughters with him. For he was afraid to return in Zoar. He dwelt in a cave, he with his 2 daughters. And like we said, now becomes the punishment kind of for him having offered his daughters to the mob. In verse 31, the older one said to the younger, our father is old and there is no man in the land to marry us in the usual manner. That they saw the destruction of these cities and they thought the world had come to an end. And they assumed they were the only survivors, that they had these angels saving them. They thought we were the only survivors. So in order to perpetuate humanity, they said in verse 32, come, let us ply our father with wine and lay with him that we may give life to offspring through our fathers. That they want to have an incestual relationship with their fathers in order that they could have children and perpetuate humanity. And that's what they did. So they plied their father with wine on that night, and the older one came and lay with her father, and he was not aware of her lying down and of her getting up. And it was on the next day that the older one said to the younger, behold, I lay with my father last night, let us ply him with wine tonight as well, and you come lay with him, that we may give life to offspring through our father. So they plied their father with wine that night also, and the younger one got up and lay with him, and he was not aware of her lying down and of her getting up. So now both of them conceived. And in verse 37, the older bore a son, and she called his name Moab. He is the ancestor of Moab until this day. And the younger one also bore a son, and she called his name Ben-Ami. He is the ancestor of the children of Ammon until this day. And our sages say that because of this, it became known that Lot had children with both of his daughters, and it became a laughingstock and an embarrassment to all the people of the land. But there's a medrash that asks, where did they get this wine? They had fled from the city of Sodom. They were hiding in a cave. Where did this wine come from? And our sages say that Hashem had an angel hide wine in the cave. It said like the wine from the Garden of Eden, like the greatest, the tastiest of all wine, was hidden in this cave in the cave in order to arrange these events. And who was born from these unions? So Moab and Ammon. Moab was the ancestor of Ruth. Ruth was from the nation of Moab. And she was the great-grandmother of David HaMelech, of King David. Ammon, who's the father of the patriarch of the nation of the Ammonite nation. So they're one of the Ammonite women married Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, and was the mother. This is Naamah, was the mother of Rechavam, who was the son of Shlomo, who became king after him. So both of these nations had both of these unions, both of the daughters of Lot, each of the daughters of Lot had a great granddaughter who was a matriarch of the Jewish dynasty, of the kings from Yehuda, who eventually would come from them, the Melech HaMashiach. The Mashiach will come from these daughters. So our sages say that Lot had an incredible amount of hachnasas archim, an incredible amount of hospitality. Just it got twisted that he personally was not on the level of Avraham, and the teachings of Avraham became corrupted in Lot. But there was this incredible hospitality that he displayed, and that could not go to naught. That couldn't be lost. And because of that, he merited to have these two granddaughters who would return to the Jewish people. That hospitality, that holiness would return to the Jewish people, would return to Avraham in Rus and Naamah, and they would be the ancestors of the kings of the Jewish people, because that holiness couldn't be lost, and it was filtered out until it was what's the word? Not impersonated, but it was embodied by these two great women who rejoined the family of Abraham, rejoined the Jewish people, and that chesed of Abraham, that loving kindness and that hospitality came back to the Jewish people. Okay, so moving on. Page 91, chapter 20. Abraham is in Gerar. Abraham journeyed from there to the region of the south and settled between Kadesh and Shur and sojourned in Gerar. Abraham said of Sarah, his wife, she is my sister. So this parallels very much what happened in Egypt as well, that Abraham went to Egypt and told him he was his sister. She was taken by Paro. And Abraham said of Sarah, his wife, she is my sister. So Avimelech, king of Gerar, sent and took Sarah. And Hashem came to Avimelech in a dream by night and said to him, behold, you are to die because the woman you have taken, moreover, she is a married woman. So now Avimelech had not approached her. So he said, meaning he had not been intimate with her. So he said, oh, my Lord, will you slay a nation even though he is righteous? Did he not himself tell me she is my sister? What did I do wrong? I didn't know that they were married. And she to herself said, he is my brother. In the innocence of my heart and integrity of my hands have I done this. Avimelech saying, I would have never done anything wrong if I would have known that there was something inappropriate here. And Hashem said to him in the dream in verse 6, I too knew that it was in the innocence of your heart that you did this. I too prevented you from sinning against me. That is why I did not permit you to touch it. But now return the man's wife, for he is a prophet, and he will surely pray for you, and you will live. But if you do not return it, be aware that you surely die, you and all that is yours. So Avimelech arose the next morning. He summoned all his servants and told them all of these things in their ears, and the people were very frightened. Then Avimelech summoned Avram and said to him, what have you done to us? How have I sinned against you that you have brought upon me and my kingdom such great sin? As always, the best defense is a good offense. And instead of apologizing for taking Avram's wife, he's attacking Avram. He's going on the offensive. Deeds that ought not have been done have you done to me. And Avimelech said to Avram, what did you see that you did such a thing? He's saying, we're a very cultured people. Why is it that how could it be? Why is it that you said that she's your sister? You could have said she's your wife. And Avram said in verse 11, because I said there is but no fear of God in this place, and they will slay me because of my wife. Moreover, she is indeed my sister, my father's daughter, though not my mother's daughter, and she became my wife. And so it was when Hashem caused me to wander from my father's house. I said to her, let this be your kindness, which you shall do for me, for to whatever place we come, say of me, he is my brother. So Avram was telling Avimelech that, yes, you are a very cultured place, and you're very civilized, but there's no fear of God. I recognize that there's no fear of God. And if there's no fear of God, you could be the most cultured place in the world, and you could be the most civilized place in the world. But ultimately, if there's no fear of God, if you could get away with something, people will push the boundaries and they'll try to get away with something. And if there's no fear of God, the culture and the civilization itself becomes corrupted. And what would be unthinkable becomes permitted, and a few generations later becomes a mitzvah. And I think you see this most clearly with Germany. That Germany was the most cultured country in the 1800s, the 1900s. Germany was they had the greatest philosophers of the time, the greatest literature of the time, the greatest composers, music of the time. That Germany was the cultural capital of the world. They had these great poets and great philosophers. And like we said, that all the great musicians came from Germany, but there was something lacking there. That there was culture, but there wasn't fear of God. And because of that, the culture decided that all Jews should be killed. And murder became not only something that was allowed, but it became something that they decided was the right thing to do. And civilization only protects as much as civilization decides is right. And when civilization decides that the wrong thing is right, so then they'll push that to the greatest level. And Avram said that I saw there's no fear of God, and there's no limit to what you could do, even as civilized as you are. Okay, so Avimelech didn't argue with this, you see. And moving on page 95 in verse 14. So Avimelech took flocks and cattle and servants and maidservants, gave them to Avram, and he returned his wife Sarah to him. His wife Sarah to him. And Avimelech said, behold, my land is before you, settle wherever you see fit. And to Sarah he said, behold, I have given your brother 1,000 pieces of silver. Behold, let it be for you an eye covering for all who are with you, and to all you will be vindicated. So basically he was trying to say that people won't think that she acted inappropriately because he's giving her this great gift, which he wouldn't have done if he would look down on her. Okay, so in verse 17, so Avram prayed to Hashem, and Hashem healed Avimelech, his wife, and all his maids, and they were relieved. For Hashem had completely restrained every orifice of the household of Avimelech because of Sarah, the wife of Avram. That when Avimelech took Sarah, all the entire household of Avimelech became afflicted with a disease where it was very difficult and painful to go to the bathroom, that all their orifices were swollen shut, and as punishment for having taken Sarah. Okay, so next comes the birth of Yitzchak, and so in chapter 21 on page 95, Hashem had remembered Sarah as he had said, and Hashem did for Sarah as he had spoken. Sarah conceived and bore a son unto Avram in his old age at the appointed time of which Hashem had spoken with him. Avram called the name of his son who was born to him, whom Sarah had borne him, Yitzchak. Avram circumcised his son Yitzchak at the age of 8 days as Hashem had commanded him. And Avram was 100 years old when his son Yitzchak was born to him. Sarah said, Hashem has made laughter for me. Whoever hears will laugh for me. And she said, who is the one who said to Avram, Sarah will nurse children, for I have borne a son in his old age. So in verse 8, the child grew and was weaned. Avram made a great feast on the day Yitzchak was weaned. So there's an interesting medrash here that in Pasuk Ches, in verse 8, it said the Hebrew there for that Avram made a great feast on the day Yitzchak was weaned. The Hebrew for weaned is Vayigamel. And so there's a medrash. Where is it? 1 second. Oh, I'm sorry. Later in the passage it says that and Avram made a feast, a great feast, b'yom higamel as Yitzchak, on the day that Yitzchak was weaned. So that higamel, the Rabbeinu Bachya brings a medrash that it could be read as the Hey and Gimel, the gematria, the numerical value of the first two letters, Hey and Gimel are 8, 5 and 3 are 8, and it's 8 mal. That means he was circumcised, that he was circumcised on the 8th day, and that's the day that Avram made a feast. And the Medrash says that this is a source that when we do a bris milah, when we do a circumcision, that we make a feast. We make a feast in honor of the circumcision, and that this is one of the sources for that. Okay, the child grew and was weaned. Avram made a great feast, and then turning the page, on page 97. That Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, whom she had born to Abraham, mocking. So what does mocking mean? There's a medrash that he performed great sins of idolatry and murder and immorality. But I think it's the Sforno says that this great feast that Avraham made for Yitzchak on the day that he was weaned was that people. It says that where is it? Sarah said, Hashem has made laughter from me. Whoever hears will laugh for me, for I have born a son in his old age. And that people were mocking them. And people were saying that Avram and Sarah were married for such an incredibly long time and didn't have any children. And now Sarah was kidnapped by Avimelech, and immediately she has a child. So people were mocking and saying that the child was not Abraham's. The child was Avimelech's. And so the Sforno says that when Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian mocking, that was the mocking that he was saying, that he was making fun, he was mocking Yitzchak, saying that you're not Avram's son, you're Avimelech's son. And when Avimelech kidnapped your mother Sarah, that's when she conceived. So then in verse 10, so she said to Avram, drive out the slave woman with her son, for the son of that slave woman shall not inherit with my son Yitzchak. Meaning that she was saying that he wouldn't have been saying that. He wouldn't have been saying that that Sarah conceived from Avimelech, and that's where Yitzchak came from, if he didn't hear it from his mother. If he's saying it, it's because he heard it from his mother. And she must be trying to keep the inheritance of Avram all for her son by claiming that Yitzchak was not Avram's son, was someone else's son. So that way, Yishmael, her son, would have the entire inheritance. And that's why she's saying that. So she said, he will not inherit with my son, with Yitzchak, and he has to be driven away. And it distressed Avram, and Avram had a prophecy from Hashem to listen to Sarah, to drive him away. As it says in verse 12, since through Yitzchak will offspring be considered yours, but the son of the slave woman as well will I make into a nation, for he is your offspring. So he sent them away. He gave them bread and a skin of water and sent them away, and they strayed in the desert of Beersheba. In verse 15 on page 97, when the water of the skin was consumed, she cast off the boy beneath one of the trees. She went and sat herself at a distance, some bow shots away. For she said, let me not see the death of the child. And she sat at a distance, lifted her voice, and wept. So here you see again how Hagar may have lived in Avram's house, and it disturbed her greatly. The pain of her son, that he was thirsty and dying of thirst, disturbed her. But how skewed it was, how twisted her love for him was, is that instead any normal mother would be, their child is suffering, would sit with them, hold their hand, hug them. It was painful for her. It disturbed her to see his suffering, obviously, so she didn't want to watch it, so she just left. So went somewhere else, so she wouldn't have to witness it, how twisted her love for her son was. And in verse 17, it says that Hashem heard the cry of the youth, and an angel of Hashem called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, what troubles you, Hagar? Fear not, for Hashem has heeded the cry of the youth in his present state. Arise, lift up the youth, and grasp your hand upon him, for I'll make a great nation of him. So what does that mean, that Hashem heeded the cry of the youth in his present state? So I think the Rabbi Bachya says that it means that he didn't even have to go anywhere. Hashem didn't tell them to go and in 100 yards in that direction, you'll find a well, you'll find a spring, you'll find some water. Instead, it continues in verse 19 on page 99, then Hashem opened her eyes and she perceived a well of water. There was a well right there. Even in the place that he was answered. He didn't even need to go anywhere to find the water. But the Gemara says about this, that Hashem heeded the cry of the youth in his present state. The Gemara says that from here we see that when Hashem judges us, we're not judged based on what we'll do later. Hashem doesn't look at us and say, this person in 10 years will act in a wicked way, and therefore they should be punished now. Hashem judges us in our present state. Hashem judges us as we are in front of him, not based on the future. And Rashi, and there's a medrash on this, a little more extended medrash, that when Yishmael was crying he was dying of thirst and was crying, so the angels came before Hashem and said, how could you save him? In the future, when the Jewish people were exiled from the land of Israel, we were exiled by the Babylonians. So we passed by the descendants of Yishmael and asked for food and water. We were going into exile, and the Arabs, the descendants of Yishmael, brought us out salted fish to eat, and we ate that, and that made us very thirsty. All the salt made us very thirsty. And then instead of bringing us water or wine, they brought us skins, like bladders full of air, inflated bladders. And we took them thinking that it was water, and the air went into our stomachs and killed us, and many Jews died. And they said, this is what his descendants are going to do, and you're going to save him? And Hashem said that I don't judge based on the future, I judge as they stand in front of me. And then an aside, the Rabbeinu Hanan, one of the commentaries there, quotes the Jerusalem Talmud, that not only does this mean that Hashem judges us by the present, not the future, Hashem judges us by the present, not the past. That means at the end of days, when or maybe perhaps after our death, when we're judged when we're judged for all our actions, then we're judged for everything that we do. But at the judgment of Rosh Hashanah, Hashem judges us based on the present, not even the past. It's about who are you in this moment that you're being judged. Who are you? And that's the judgment. It's not about the future. It's not about the past. It's about who we are in the moment. And that's a long topic. I spoke about that at length before Rosh Hashanah. But that is just a summary of how our sages understand this verse. Okay, so continuing on in on page 99, verse 20, Hashem was with the youth and he grew up. He dwelled in the desert and became an accomplished archer. Lived in the desert of Paran, and his mother took a wife for him from the land of Egypt. Okay, and then Avimelech and Fichol, the Philistines, wanted to make a covenant and alliance with Avram. So in verse 23 on page 99, it says, now swear to me here by Hashem that you will not deal falsely with me, nor with my son, nor with my grandson, according to the kindness that I have done with you, do with me and with the land in which you have sojourned. And Avram said, I will swear. So they made this covenant. And on the bottom of page 99, in verse 34, or verse 33, he planted an Eshel in Beersheba. I say an Eshel is short for achila, which means eating, drinking, and either spending the night or accompanying, which are the three principles of hospitality, is that we give them to eat, we give them to drink, and perhaps a place to stay overnight. And finally, we accompany them as we're leaving. We escort them out on their way out. And then in verse 34, and Avram sojourned in the land of the Philistines many years. Okay, and then on page 101, this is chapter 22, we have the Akeres Yitzchak, the binding of Yitzchak. And it says that, and it happened after these things that Hashem tested Avram, said to him, Avram, he said, here I am. And he said, please take your son, your only one whom you love, Yitzchak, and go to the land of Moriah. Bring him up there as an offering upon one of the mountains which I shall tell you. So he told him to bring your son as an offering, human sacrifice, which was an incredible test for Avram. Avram was the one who was going around preaching to all the nations not to do human sacrifice, not to do all these pagan offerings, instead to worship Hashem. And here Hashem's telling him to do not only, of course, offering up his son Yitzchak, which itself is a tremendous test, but to go against everything that he'd preached up until now. But in verse 3, so Avram woke up early in the morning, he saddled his donkey and took his two young men with him, Yitzchak his son, he split wood for the offering, stood up and went to the place which Hashem had spoken to him. He even got up early in the morning in his alacrity in fulfilling the will of Hashem. He said, if this is the will of Hashem, I have to do it with excitement. And he even got up early in the morning to do it. And then continuing on page 103, verse 6, and Avram took the wood for the offering, placed it on Yitzchak his son. He took in his hand the fire and the knife, and the two of them went together. Then Yitzchak spoke to Avram his father and said, Father, here I am, my son. And he said, here are the fire and the wood, but where's the lamb for the offering? So Yitzchak was asking, what's going on? And Avram said, Hashem will seek out for himself the lamb for the offering, my son. And the two of them went together. I say to say that this was a hint, and Yitzchak understood that he was the offering, and still the two of them went together, meaning with the same mind, Yitzchak went understanding he was being offered, but still went with excitement for that being the will of Hashem. And they arrived at the place which Hashem had spoken to him. Avram built the altar there and arranged the wood, and he bound Yitzchak his son and placed him up on the altar atop the wood. Avram stretched out his hand and took the knife to slaughter his son. There's an interesting language here, just as an aside. It says that it said Avram built the altar. Usually, since it's being built anew, it would be Avram built an altar. Here it says Avram built the altar. The sages say that this was, in fact, the place. This was Har Moriah, Mount Moriah. This was the Temple Mount, and he built it in the place that the altar of the Beis HaMikdash, the altar of the temple, be built. And it says that he bound Yitzchak his son and placed him on the altar atop the wood. In verse 10, Avram stretched out his hand and he took the knife to slaughter his son. And an angel of Hashem called him from heaven and said, Avram, Avram, and he said, here I am. And in verse 12, and he said, do not stretch out your hand against the lad, nor do anything to him, for now I know that you are a God-fearing man, since you have now withheld your son, your only one, from me. And Avram raised his eyes and saw, behold, a ram afterwards caught in a thicket. by its horn. So Avram went and took the ram and offered it up as an offering instead of his son. And Avram called the name of that site Hashem Yira'eh, and it is said this day on the mountain Hashem will be seen. Okay, so the Rabbeinu Bachya asked us, other commentaries asked, that we invoke this, the Akedas Yitzchak, the binding of Yitzchak, Avram being willing to offer his son Yitzchak up as a merit for us to this day. Whenever we have trouble on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we invoke that this should be a merit for us and save us from our troubles. The fact that Avram was willing to offer up his son Yitzchak. And they asked that he didn't even do it. We're asking the merit for something that he almost did. And when we understand that being willing to do something like that is a big thing, but he didn't do it. He was stopped before he actually brought it to completion. So why is it such a foundational event in our history that he almost did a great thing? He didn't do it. So they answer that in this world, we live in the physical world. They call it the Elam Hasiya, the world of doing, the physical world where the deeds are done. And we're very limited by what we could do. We look at ourselves and recognize that. So, as I know myself, that there are things that I used to do I can't do anymore. I'm aging, and I can't run as fast. I can't cut as fast. I can't, I don't have the stamina to, play roller hockey for 4 hours, in the heat that I used to. And, but we could try to do these things. And we're very limited in general what we could do. We're limited by the physical world and what we could actually accomplish. But what we really have control over, we don't have control over what actually gets done for the results of our actions. What we do have control over is our decisions. We have control over our intentions, and whether we're able to bring our intentions to bear and to actuality into the physical world. That might happen, might not happen. We might be successful, we might not be successful. But when we really intend to do something, that's not something, our intentions aren't something in the physical world. The actions in the physical world, our intention is in the spiritual world. It's our neshama, it's our soul that makes the decision to do something. And sometimes our body, our physical being is limited in being able to do that for various reasons. It could be that physically we can't do it. It could be that other people are preventing. It could be our situations is preventing. Sometimes things just don't get done that we want to get done. But if we truly want it and we decide to do it and truly intend to do it, spiritually, our neshama has done everything and has done all that it could do and all that it does do to do it. So in the spiritual world, it's done already. When we truly intend to do a mitzvah, we make that decision and intend to do it, and circumstances in the physical world stop it from being done. Spiritually, it has been done. That just the intention to do it is the spiritual side of the doing, and it has been done. So when we're invoking the binding of the offering up of Yitzchak, it's not that we're saying that Avram almost did it. He almost offered his son as an offering. He did spiritually, in the spiritual world, it was done. And all the effects of it having been done were true in the spiritual world. Spiritually, Yitzchak was an offering. Yitzchak was brought as an offering up to Hashem on the altar. And our sages say that Yitzchak could never leave the land of Israel because he was brought as an offering to Hashem. Not that he was almost brought as an offering. He was brought as an offering to Hashem because spiritually, in the spiritual world, it happened. It wasn't stopped in the spiritual world. It was stopped in the physical world. It didn't physically happen. But Avram actually did offer him in the spiritual sense. And that's why this merit is so incredibly effective for us to this day. I say that Avram davened that whenever anything were to happen to his descendants, that this action should be a merit for us and to protect us. Okay, and in verse 15 on page 105, the angel of Hashem called to Avram a second time from heaven, and he said, by myself I swear the word of Hashem, that because you have done this thing and have not withheld your son, your only one, that I shall surely bless you and greatly increase your offering like the stars of the heavens, like the sand of the seashore, and your offspring shall inherit the gate of its enemy. And all the nations of the earth shall bless themselves by your offspring, because you have listened to my voice. And then Avram returned to Beersheba. And in verse 20, the Parsha concludes that it came to pass after these things that Avram was told, saying, behold, Milcah too has borne children to Nachor, your brother. Nachor was the brother of Avram. And Milcah, Nachor's wife, has borne children. Uz his firstborn, Buz his brother, Kemuel, the father of Aram, and Chesed, Chazar, Pildash, and Besuel. And Besuel begot Rivka. These 8 Milcah bore to Nachor, Avram's brother, and his concubine, his name was Reum, also bore children Teva, Tachash, and Makkah. Safe to say that here it talks about the birth of Rivka, because now that Yitzchak was brought as an offering, like we said, Yitzchak was brought as an offering. He became incredibly holy because of that. And he couldn't be married to just anybody. And Rivka was, Reb Shimon Schwab says that Rivka wasn't born, she was actually born earlier, but at this point, she was born anew in a sense. She got a new neshama because she was Yitzchak's bashert. She was to be Yitzchak's wife. And now she had to match him. And since Yitzchak had grown, she grew also to match Yitzchak's growth, so she would be able to be his wife. Keshkayach, have a great Shabbos.